Alright, so let's just have a look at this preflop sim. So this preflop sim, the precision is pretty low right now. It'll get there by at a later stage, but you can look at the opening range. Opening range is fairly straightforward, I think. So we're opening. Did I learn the entire thing? Where is the fault? Anyway, doesn't matter. Folding 17.6% of the time. Right, so that means you're opening at 100 big blinds deep. 82.4% of the time. Okay, so opening a little over 80%, a little less than 85%, and then because you're in position, I'm going to be using a variety of different sizes here. So we've got this 50% size, 55% size is being liked right now, but I think as the sim runs closer to completion, some of the bigger sizes will be used a bit more often. I know that the brightest seem to like 2.5x open, so maybe the distribution of open sizes will push a bit up. But we can have a look at some stuff anyway. Let's say, for example, we open to 2.1, which is 55, right? And we can just flick through these really quick just to see what the 3-bet range is looking like so far. So there's 2.1, so it's 2, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, 2.9, 3, 3.25, 3.5, 3.75, and 4. Right. So bit of a spectrum there. But in general, you can see like when you were going to be defending out of position, if you're defending out of position against basically any open, your 3-bet value range is going to be definitely 8s plus, and potentially 7s as well. And then you'd also consider ace king, ace queen, king queen, ace jack, and ace 10 is pretty much value all the way through, even against this big size. Against a big size, bit of a king queen and ace 10 is a call. As I'm open 4x, that's 3.75. So basically, the 3-bet value range is going to be 8s plus, ace jack plus, king queen. And then in addition to the king queen, you've also got king jack, king 10 suited, queen jack suited, and queen 10 suited. So basically, you're 3-betting all the suited broadways as like a value component, with the exception of jack 10 suited, which 3-bets at a very high frequency, just not all the time. Okay, so like if you consider that to be the value component, there's still a good chunk of ace 9 suited as well, ace 9 offsuit. So like all these big aces, ace 8 suited. And as the sim runs a bit further, it might get a bit more polar. We'll see. And then in terms of the other kinds of bluffs that we're going to be using, these 4 suited connectors here, the strongest suited connectors, 6, 5, 5, 4, 7, 6, and 8, 7. They're 3 being all the time for most of the sizes, right? So very small sizes, you get 5, 4 all the time. The slightly bigger sizes, 5, 4, and 8, 7 kind of peter off and using the offsuit hand instead. But definitely against these smaller sizes so far, like these suited connectors, at least 6, 5, and 7, 6 being used all the time. 8, 7, 5, 4, 9, 8, suited 2 gappers. Suited 1 gappers, and some suited 2 gappers you chuck in there as well. Not 4-3. 4-3 is pretty shite. 5-3 is a lot better than 4-3. I don't understand why people like putting 4-3 when they do their range construction. And then besides that, it's going to be a bunch of obviously the suited aces up at the top right, and then some offsuit stuff which you just chuck in. So let's say, for example, you face a min open, and then a 3-bet size. Let's go 175, for example. And then there's a min 4-bet, min 4, 50% 4-bet. Most common 4-bet sizes going to be around between 20 and 25 big blinds. So say something like that. You're folding a bunch of stuff, like a lot of the suited stuff that you do decide to 3-bet does continue. And there I said S-check was value, but here against the 4-bet, it's not really that strong. And then this is your versus 4-bet range, where you have multiple 5-bet sizes. You've got a couple 5-bet sizes here. The all-in, right? You're pretty happy to jam the 10s, 9s, 8s, jacks, queens, ace king offsuit, ace queen offsuit, go to a king queen suited. But
that looks about like the breakdown.
But then what the interesting thing is that you've got this kind of min/smallish for 5-bet, where you're doing it with kings. And you're flatting aces. Yeah, you're just flatting aces there against the 4-bet, and then like you're min 5-betting kings, which I think is pretty nice because at least that way you get a good chunk of value when you've got kings. If they got ace king, they just rip it into you anyway, and then you can kind of get you kind of punish a 4-bet range that's not sufficiently polar by making this min 5-bet. Right, if the 4-bet range isn't polar enough, like this min 5-bet is going to be really good. They're going to be forced to be calling a bunch of hands that really don't like being forced to call, like this ace queen suited, ace jack suited. Don't really like playing a 5-bet pot with a stack to pot ratio of like 0.7. So that's the min open. Other kinds of opens, let's have a look at 2.3. 2.3. I guess we can take a look at the same line, see if there's any differences. There won't really be too many differences. Instead of it's going to be 60% now. Same kind of idea. As you can see, you've got the all-in, and then you've got some of the min/50% 4-bet. I mean, as the sim runs a bit further, it might decide that just likes having some min 4-bets with the kings, but it's looking like there's enough of an EV difference to be taking this min 5-bet with kings. Heads up out of position here, and then chucking some other hands in it to make it really difficult for the opponent to continue. Like if they're 4-betting you with, like what's a 4-bet range going to look like? Here's against the 3-bet. This is the 4-bet range, 10s plus, ace queen, a little bit of 9s, right?
Yeah, pretty polar.
Yeah, I mean fairly polar. If it's not polar enough, that min 5-bet's gonna be really difficult to play against, right? Mm-hmm. If they're going to be 4-betting you stuff like ace jack, even these suited aces, right? Like how does suited aces play when the 4-bet, right? And the 5-bet's not all in, like it kind of has to call, right? You see ace 2, ace 5, like all that stuff will have to call, and when the ace misses, like it's just a really shit spot. So the presence of that min 5-bet forces this 4-bet to be quite polar still, and of course you still got plenty of all-ins, right? Ripping it with basically any pocket pair, you can just like rip it in, but definitely 10s through queens, ace king, ace queen, and a little bit of like this suited stuff as the king queen suited is doing it, and that sets up 4-betting, 5-betting, even it's like a bigger size. Let's say this one's 2.6, and then you get like 200. Like as you would expect, same kind of 4-bet range. Here's say 50%, even min, right? 50% of min. Like you're still seeing the use of the split between the sizes. You got an all-in and you got a min 5-bet.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So it's min 5-bet. Yeah, that was this 4-bet is to 25%. 4 and a bit. And the 5-bet like being min around 35. It's around 35, which is about a little less than 40% of the stack. Min 6-bet, that's a bit strange too. But yeah, I mean, you're probably not going to face a min 5-bet unless they've really done their study. It's been going on for it's been going on for a few days now, and it's only the precision is not quite very high. Okay, so it's 2.2, right? 2.2, 2.2, 2.25. Like you can see, the calling range shrinks up a lot. Okay, so then going to post flop, like here you've got the opening range, 82% hands, but even if you open min, right, folding about 30% of the time, so basically continuing 30% hands. So what does that mean? That means that the calling range is going to be stronger on average than the opening range, right? Even against the min open and whatever, which is very different from when you open the button and then the big blind calls. When you open the button min and the big blind calls in like a ring game, the big blind's range is going to be wider, and so then you're going to be able to sap the flop a lot. When you're positioned here in heads up, there's going to be a lot more checking back to see the turn, right? A lot of these hands here you would consider, I guess, quote unquote bluffs. You're betting them. You're making this bet pre-flop, try and take down the pot. You get your 3-card draw, which is the flop, and then if the flop is good for you, then you can consider going to bet again. But a lot of the time, you're going to have hands which have to check back. There has to be checking back in heads up because of the difference in the range, right?
Okay, could you touch on why that is? Like, what makes the big blind's range tighter in heads up than like 6 max?
Yeah, so in 6 max against a min open, a lot of the time the big blind is calling because they end up having direct odds with the small blind out of the way. The big blind was calling 1 to win 4.5, but here in heads up, you're calling 1 to win 4, so a little bit weaker odds. So the odds just aren't quite as good as in the full ring game, as in a ring game. And there's because of the presence of the small blind as well, an additional player who will 3-bet the open. The opener can't open anywhere near as wide as they could heads up. Basically, meaning that a lot of the time when the big blind calls in a ring game, they're calling because they have good odds to call, not necessarily because they think that their hand is essentially bluff catching, right? Versus heads up, like you're calling because you're bluff catching, right? You're not calling just to draw, you're calling to bluff catch as well,
right?
So that's one way to look at it, and so the small blind in heads up is going to basically have a bunch of pre-flop bluffs, as you can see. Let's say, for example, against 2.5, you'd still be opening roughly an 80% range, but then the big blind's going to be continuing with about a 60% range here. So you got the fold being at 41.5, so a little less than 60% continuing. And so, like when they continue a little less than 60%, you see your flop. Sure, your ranges on average is going to be polar because the big blind themselves would have 3-bet a lot of their strong preflop hands, Okay, so while the small blind has a lot of preflop bluffs, they also have the preflop value, and so when you go into the single raise pot, the big blind will still be checking to the small blind all the time because of the polarity in the small blind range, right? The existence of those strong preflop hands as well as a lot of the weak preflop hands together creates a polar range, right? And that polar range has to will be betting sometimes, not all the time, because of what we discussed, the difference in the relative range strength. There's a lot of very weak hands, like the button will be opening some very weak hands like Jack 5 and Queen 3, but you won't be calling them in the big blind. So the small blind will have a bunch of very weak hands that will often miss and then check back and try and draw. Okay, and that's their advantage by being in position, which once again kind of contrasts to ring games, where it's in fact the big blind who often flops the polar range because they have a bunch of very weak hands. And when they do decide to draw, they're going to be drawing with like suited, connected, and that kind of stuff. So they end up flopping a variety of two pairs and draws on certain boards. And on, for example, paired boards, they basically flop trips or air. So they end up with a very polar range, polar and wide range. Yeah. So with the polar and wide range, out of the big blind in a ring game, the in position opener is usually going to be betting small at a high frequency to deny equity. But here in heads up, it's the opposite. Here in heads up, it's the opener that has the polar and wide range. Okay, so instead of them betting small at a high frequency, they should in fact be betting big at a lower frequency. Big as in like they might be using sizes like half pot, even some overbets, right? It's still going to be you're still going to have to worry in the big blind here about overbets on like those low boards, those low rag boards,
disconnected boards, yeah.
Right? You're going to have to worry about that as the big blind because you don't have any of the overbets to defend. And then you, as the opener, can take advantage of your knowledge about flop overbets, which not a lot of people will be very comfortable facing an overbet on the flop. But yeah, in heads up, it happens fairly frequently. So, for example, like 10-5-3 or something, like 10-5-3, you get into 2.5. This is the big blind calling range. 10-5-3, there's no top set. There's still the 5 and the 3.
No offsuit 2 pair.
There's no offsuit 2 pairs, so there's only 5-3 suited, 10-5 and 10-3 suited. Right. But the opener's got jacks, queens, kings, aces. They can use to basically just make that big overbet. And then also like the offsuit 2 pair as well. So that kind of range polarity, right? Yeah. A nice range polarity leads to the overbet. But on 10-5-3, it's still really hard to hit. Like you're going to have jack 6, 7, 6, whatever. A lot of the time you're just going to have like a random gut shot or something, or like a random overcard. And then you're going to use that to be bluffing in the overbet line. Other stuff, I mean, basically any kind of lowish rag board that you can think of will work pretty well for the overbet.
I'm assuming the line and the range construction would be similar to a button versus big blind.
Yeah, I mean it'll be similar. Yeah, it'll be fairly similar in terms of in terms of range construction, in terms of how you do it, except here you're going to have more hands to choose from, more these offsuit hands to choose from. So you're going to have a bunch of offsuit draws as well. Yeah. Say example, you open 2.2 and they call and it's like 8-7 deuce or something, right? And surely got a 7 offsuit. But they don't have 8s, they don't have 7s very often. And you've got 9s plus and they don't. So basically you're very happy overbetting 9s, 10s, jacks as in position. And then like ace-8 probably as well. They don't even have ace-8 suited and ace-8 offsuit that often. What did I say? 8-7? Yeah, 8-7 deuce, and then basically you got a bunch of draws. Like you got every draw under the sun that connects to 8-7. So you can use a wide variety of draws. Obviously, you're going to be probably using the backdoor flush draws or even frontdoor flush draws if there are any, preferably. So definitely make use of a lot of flop overbetting when you're playing. Heads up, you open small, and the pot becomes 2 and a bit. The pot on average in heads up is actually going to be a bit smaller than the ring games because of the absence of that extra small blind. So that means that you're going to have to use bigger sizes on average in order to get the entire stack in, just because the stack to pot ratio starting off is a bit lower. In some sense, say open 2.5, they call. There's 97.5 blinds behind, 5 in the middle. Fairly nice stack to pot ratio. But that extra 0.5 does change things a little bit. It just means you have to use slightly bigger sizes, of course, because of what we just discussed in terms of the polarity of in position compared to the ring game. You're going to be using bigger sizes, so probably will be you probably should be avoiding small bets in position if you can. And I'm not sure if you've seen too much of that in the sims that you run, but you can probably see that the small bets aren't being used that often.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we can go through some of my post-flop sims. There's quite a few spots where small bet is preferred.
Yeah, so I mean, there is, but just it's not going to be as ubiquitous as the ring game.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's have a look. I'll stop sharing, and then you can share. All right, you share yours now.
You have to allow me to screen share.
All right.
Well, I have to
try now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I had all these. I think it was like 174 flops run, and then I just crudely broke them down into smaller piles just so I could open them quicker. But I'm just waiting on this one to open. Low boards. We can take a look at some of the individual boards. Is there like a board type you'd want to look at?
Sure. How about you show me one that you think will have some small sizes? And we'll have a look about why that might be.
Yeah, I don't have the greatest hardware, so this takes a second. Okay. Yep. So this is pretty much a range bet for the quarter size.
Yep. And so press that. Okay. So let's talk through the pre-flop ranges. So this is going to be assuming min open. Okay. Yeah. So let's have a look. So min open. I mean, still going to be defending fairly wide. And imagine this is going to be no rec either. Is it solved with or without rec?
This is 5% cap at 1.
Okay, yep.
I have the database file loading in the background, by the way.
No, yeah, that's fine. So you got this min open pre-flop. I mean, I think the opposition is probably calling too wide. So the opposition range you got there is probably wider than a little bit wider than it should be. Okay. So like stuff like the Jack 4 and whatnot, you don't really have to be defending them, and like that's the kind of that's kind of the issue when you're running the sims through through Pio.
Yeah.
And without the multiple sizes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Multiple 3-bet and 4-bet sizes. Anyway, so yeah, I mean the pre-flop range is just a tad wider than I would have thought. Maybe you could argue that the person you're playing against will be defending quite wide out of position, just because they like to defend quite wide out of position, and if they do, then yeah, sure, min out here. Another issue with the way that this sim is constructed is that there isn't a min check raise, or a small check raise. So there you got 28%, which is fine. And then what's that smallest raise size you got? 50%, is it?
50, I think.
Yeah, so you got 50 and 100, which is I mean, it's probably what people are going to be using. But in terms of what you might use, so like say for example, where we're setting the spot from your point of view as the big blind, like your range is going to be a bit different from this going into it, and you're going to be able to make these small check raises.
Yeah, well, lately I've been looking a bunch into main clicking the paired boards, like in 6-max situations. And I've been doing that quite a bit. So
yeah, and often the times where you see in position bets at a very high frequency when the pre-flop ranges don't really make sense of that, it's probably because there can be some deficiencies in the number of raise sizes here. So, I mean, obviously, adding a very small raise size does increase the RAM tremendously when you're running a full database solved like this, which looks like it's come up. So that small raise size, maybe if you did have something like 2.5, 2.5x or 2x would mean that that's going to be used a bit more often, and so then your position might check back a little bit more.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think also the sizes aren't too bad either.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect well, like in the EP versus big blind sims I've run, like on paired boards, the presence of the small check raise affects the c-bet frequency pretty dramatically. So I suspect on these really dry boards, if there is a min clip size, then although on this board, I'm not too sure about the min clip.
Yeah, it might not be a min click. It might be it might make more sense to do something a little bit bigger than min. So that's why if that's what I'm saying, maybe 2.5 or maybe 2.5x could work pretty well if you wanted to rerun a sim like that just out of curiosity. Okay, let's have a look at this Ace King.
I don't have an overbet size.
Yeah. That's probably the issue that you're seeing here, because this kind of board is really one that you want to have an overbet. Here what's going on is like Ace King and Ace King is being put into the min size to try and induce a raise. So that's what the solver is doing. Like it doesn't have the option to make the overbet and put a bunch of money in itself. So it's doing the next best thing, which is bet everything small and hope that the guy raises you.
And well, the guy ran these for me and helped me out quite a bit. So I didn't want to have him go through the hassle changing out a bunch of different trees. But I'm familiar with the lines, so I'm not too worried about it. But just because I'm pretty well versed on the button raise big blind flop over betting, so.
Yeah. So like here, what the stack to pot ratio is 24. Probably go for like a 3x pot over bet kind of thing, right? Like what did they have? Ace 3, King 3. Not a lot. And there you go. There's a turn over bet with the Ace King, Kings, Aces. It's 1.5. Does it let you get? Does it seem like you get the money on the river? So let's try that over bet. Use whatever brick.
Not quite.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Possible.
Yeah. Pots the river. I think it's jammed on by a flush. I mean, if you go 2 of diamonds or something instead. And there's the other bet again. I mean, it's not given the opportunity to get all in. So the solver is feeling desperate to put more money in, but it can't. Anyway, that's fine. At least you know that you can be using big overbets in this, and probably should be, even starting on the flop. Now let's. Is there anything else that you want to talk about in this database, these databases that you've run? Otherwise, we can talk a little bit about multiple opening sizes.
Let's talk about that.
All right, I'll go back to sharing my screen.
Okay.
All right, you can see that now. All right. So in terms of the multiple sizes, once the sim runs a bit longer, it'll probably push some sizes a bit further up. I'm thinking around about 2.5, potentially a bit less, potentially a bit more. with the presence of rake, it's probably going to be a bit lower than you'd expect, because rake generally makes both players a little bit more passive. Contrary to popular belief. So here, there you can kind of see the different sizes being used. Like some hands which you're thinking are more sort of middling are being used for like the smaller size, like this dark blue is the min open, king 7, king 6, king 5, 10, 4, that kind of stuff. So the marginal kind of stuff is being used a bit to the smaller size, and then the slightly bigger sizes, like these big offsuit aces that you got. I think it's 75% there. 200%. Or something like that being chucked in a decent chunk of the time. 75, 100. Anyway, one of those. I don't have enough colours for these I don't have enough colours for all this. All right. But the idea is you're going to try and play post-flop according to what you think that the range asymmetry is going to be. So it's still going to be the case where when you open, is going to have a polar and wider range than the big blind caller. But the degree to which that happens is going to depend on which open size that you choose. So say, for example, you open min, right? The difference in the relative range strength going into most flops is not going to be as big as if you opened 2.5 or 3, right? When you start opening to the bigger size, you're going to be checking back a lot more on the flop. Versus when you're opening the smaller size, you're actually going to be c-betting the flop a bit more often. Any questions about that?
That makes sense. It kind of goes along with what I know about multiple open sizes so far.
Yeah, so like if you've had some practice with using the multiple open sizes in the ring game, exploitatively, if you're doing it just exploitatively, what you can do is chuck your more marginal hands, more middling hands towards a smaller size, and then use a bigger size with your strong hands, and have some additional polarity into that big size than you otherwise normally would. I think here for this match that you're going to play, not really necessary to do that, but using multiple sizes will be putting most opponents on edge, right? Even just switching between the two randomly with the flip of a coin or some RNG will freak a lot of people out and force them to, and then get them to play a bit more differently than they would normally otherwise, right? So basically, in this situation, using these multiple open sizes to leverage your additional knowledge about the game, and how you're going to be continuing on a lot of different flops, and what kinds of hands are you going to be betting, and the betting frequencies. When you're opening small, you're going to be c-betting more often on the flop. When you open big, you're going to be c-betting less often on the flop. And if you see that your opponents have any leaks, you can allocate hands to the different open sizes which you think will be able to take more advantage of those leaks. So say, for example, your opponent doesn't like to probe the turn, right? After they've made after you've missed your c-bet, the turn comes, they don't probe at a fairly high frequency, and they elect to check raise instead. One thing that you can do is you can elect pre-flop to see the river more often by using a certain hand in the bigger size, because in the bigger size you're not going to be c-betting as often. You're going to be checking back, and you're going to be exploiting their tendency to not stab the turn, to not probe the turn. So you putting a marginal hand into a bigger open size pre-flop, you get to see the river more often, and so you get to realize more river equity in position, which is a really nice exploit that you can make. So you're using pre-flop sizings and a few minor adjustments to your pre-flop strategy to take advantage of post-flop mistakes, lines that you can see might or might not be done correctly. Now, in terms of multiple 3-bet sizes, like if we're looking at the different 3-bet sizes, there's a variety we can use here. This is just because the sim hasn't run to a high enough precision to be able to pick one that it likes. But I imagine, like, they open min, you decide to 3-bet anywhere between probably around 10 would make a fair amount of sense. Maybe even be a bit less than, maybe even be a bit less or more than 10, so like 8 to 12 or even 8 to 14. We'll see as this runs to completion or to a high precision, which open size which 3-bet size that it really likes. But once again, range of 3-bet sizes. The bigger you 3-bet pre-flop, the more you're going to be checking the flop out of position. And the smaller you 3-bet, the more you're going to be stabbing the flop. Right, just the same kind of deal as in general. Once you made a bigger bet on the previous street, on the current street or whatever, you're going to be checking more often if you've made that bigger bet. And in the extreme case, it might be necessary for your opponent to donk in order to prevent you from checking back. All right. So, say for example here, like the reason why like these big pre-flop sizes are rejected fairly quickly is because of the presence of donks in the post-flop tree. Like you open very big, and then if the board is good enough for you, you can just donk. Right.
Yeah.
All right, so that's multiple open sizes, a little bit about multiple 3-bet sizes. The 4-bet size, I don't think you really have to get fancy here with using multiple 4-bet sizes. Pick a size between, like you've got the 60% and 75% being liked a fair amount there. Let's say 55, 150. There you go, like 75, 175. 20 big blinds. I'd say anywhere between, I'd say around 20 to 20. I think 25 itself is probably a bit too big. Just because, like, if you 4-bet to 25, you open yourself up for your opponent to basically play a little bit closer to jam or fold as they continue. So really, you don't want to be 4-betting to a size which allows them to easily play jam or fold. And if your opponent doesn't have min 5-bets with kings as a part of their strategy, like going even smaller is pretty nice, because it prevents them from playing jam or fold and forces them to play more 4-bet pots out of position. All right. So here open as the small blind, you get 3-bet. Then, like, if we're betting, here's 21. All right, there's that all-in percentage of 8.3. But if you instead 3-bet to 25, right, that all-in percentage goes up to 21%, right? So there's a fairly big difference just by those extra few chips that you put in. And once again, even less here, right? This is a very small 4-bet, probably for 18.5 big blinds. Might want to kind of avoid that kind of thing. So they make a nice hefty 3-bet. Right, once again going fairly small. If you pot it, you open yourself up to getting your opponent playing jam or fold. It's still easy to defend. Right, you want to be forwarding to a size that forces them to have this min 5-bet as a strategic option, and then if they choose to not use that option, they've made a mistake, and so you win EV accordingly. Right, if they choose to only play jam or fold, right, against a 4-bet, rather than having a min 5-bet or a small 5-bet size, if they make that choice, they've made a minus EV choice with certain hands, in particular with what this sim is saying, in particular with pocket kings. And this sim was run for 5% rate, capped at 1, the same as your postflop sim. So should be interesting to see, and like the 5-bet pot is not going to be too difficult to play, because like most of the time you're going to have kings or ace king suited. There's ace queen and some other stuff. Maybe you chuck in a tad of aces, but aces will like to flat the 4-bet a lot of the time to protect the other suited aces. That's if you're playing out of position, but if they're playing out of position, if they've made the 3-bet and they have to continue against this 4-bet, it becomes very difficult. Probably should have some more 4-bet sizes, but yeah, I have what I have. Let's go to 225. A couple sizes there. 250. Getting to the point of the stick now. There's some min 50%. As you can see, once it goes to 50% min jam. Yeah, once it gets to around 25 big blinds in the middle, like their defense is going to be jam. There's not going to be a lot of min 5-bets, right? Yeah, it's 23, right? I'm sure once this sim runs a bit further, it'll end up liking the slightly bigger sizes to prevent the opponent from making a small enough 4-bet that you can't really play 5-bet or play most of your 5-bets as the all-in. So maybe some of these 3-bet sizes will move up. So right now it's a bit small. Right now it's liking to 3-bet around 9 big blinds. But maybe as I run it further, it'll eventually see that actually I like being able to I like being able to 5-bet all in, right? And so because it likes being able to 5-bet all in, it'll choose a 3-bet size that prevents a 4-bet, which prevents your 5-bet all in. So it's a bit of a level there, right? So instead of 3-betting to 9, I might want to 3-bet to like 12 or 13, because 12 to 13 means that the min 4-bet is only going to be 23, 24, which is enough of the percentage stack in to allow for the all-in 5-bet. But that being said, if you're putting in these big 3-bets, there's the risk of the 4-bet all-in comes into play. So you've got to have a delicate balance there, right? If you think that your opponents aren't going to be having a 4-bet all-in, then you can probably get away with using bigger 3-bet sizes as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, you had a question?
I mean, as far as what to do versus this particular opponent. I'll likely just use one 3-bet size as best I can tell, as closest to equilibrium, and then if I feel like there's some adjustments I could make according, to these principles, I'll probably do that in game.
Yeah, good. I mean,
but being aware that like being able to play 5-bet jam or fold is like your best, like that's advantageous for you, is good introspect.
Yeah.
Because I think, just to make sure I understood your point, if he's like, we don't want to play a strategy that allows him to play jam or fold, is sort of the idea.
Yeah, so when you're in position, you want to 4-bet a size that's big, so you can get some value, but not so big that jam or fold is an option, or playing all of your 5-bets as an all-in is an option. You if they're using a 3-bet size that is small, you can punish that by choosing a 4-bet size that's a little bit smaller too, right? To kind of remove that 5-bet all-in option, right? They shouldn't be taking it as much, because they should instead try to go for a min 5-bet.
Okay.
Or with like kings and then trapping aces. So, for example, like 2.2, if they go like a really small 3-bet, what is the size 3-bet? 7.7. Let's take a 7.7, 8.8, yeah, 2.2 to 8.8, so that's 4x. Here 75% is liked by this sim, and then the all-in, so it's 22 big blinds, so that was what, 2.2 to 8.8 to 22, right? So this here is a response to the 22, and like fairly mixed. They can't just get away with just ripping all these hands. Like they can't even, like they if they just jam aces, they lose money. If they jam kings instead of min 5-bet, they lose money, right? And like a good chunk of the time, if an ace king suited, right, it much prefers to play that small 5-bet pot instead, right? Here's min 5-bet, smallish 5-bet, and then like it also allows you to have some min 5-bet faults, which are fun to look at, but like you can min 5-bet like a king 10 offsuit and then follow it till the all-in. On the flip side, if they're 3-betting too big, then you want to be exercising your 4-bet all-in option, right? Although I don't think against most opponents you'll face anyone that likes to 3-bet very big. They're usually going to do something like close to 4x or 5x. Not really going to be taking their option to go 6 or 7x over you, just for the sake of it. Yeah, I mean, what else can I say about this? Study. I mean, it's fairly easy once you know roughly what the 3-bet range is. So the 3-bet value component, and then the get it in range is actually fairly similar to like the main value component, like the pocket pairs and the ace king and the ace queen. The get it in range is basically pocket pairs, ace king and ace queen, and then there's some other marginal stuff on the side which you use as like block a bluff kind of thing with the king queen suited, king jack suited. There's a rip there. But yeah, once again, like the gathering range is going to be fairly similar. If you do find yourself in some spots where like you have a hand which shouldn't really be in there, like the good thing about Monker is that it can tell you what the EV is, even if you don't have the hand in the range. So like here that them have a hovering over ace 10 suited, saying it's a poss EV call. Ace 9 suited, not really. Ace 5, not really. King queen, yes. King jack, yes. King 10, not really. Queen jack, yes, that's an okay call for the all-in. Jack 10 is an okay call for the all-in. Ace jack offsuit is an okay call for the all-in. So what's that saying? Like, try to avoid four betting those hands where you're not comfortable calling an all-in, because like it becomes plus EV to be calling those all-ins, like with this king queen suited, king jack suited, ace 10 suited. You might be tempted to 4-bet it, but like once you 4-bet it, it becomes plus EV to call the all-in. Unless you 4-bet to a very small size, like there you go. Even the 50% 4-bet, like your rip at king jack suited is calling.
Yeah, that's versus the big 4-bet size, I guess. What we were looking at previously.
Yeah, compared to the big. So this is the 4-bet range.
Oh, okay.
So like if you did 4-bet the king jack a bit small, and then you get ripped on, you're kind of calling, because you have the odds to, which is kind of gross. Yeah. So that's why you want to avoid 4-betting it, and then go a bit more polar. Like you got a lot of polar hands to choose from. Folding percentages are going to be fairly elastic against the 3-bet size. In terms of like the hands that are always going to be calling even against these very big 3-bet sizes are basically like your low jack opening range. Like this looks very similar to a low jack opening range. So if you can kind of remember your low jack opening range, like that's going to basically always going to continue against the 3-bet. Even if the 3-bet's very big, and if the 3-bet gets smaller, like the range winds up. So like you're going to have to be quite elastic with it. But the 4-bet value range remains the same, right? So here against this small 3-bet, very small 3-bet to a spot size 3-bet. Then you got 9s, sometimes 10s plus. Ace queen, ace jack suited, but then against the bigger 3-bets, right? Same kind of range, right? Against 3-bets really big, so you're trapping aces, because you want to be calling all your suited aces, and all your offsuit aces too. So aces makes for a nice trap there. And like in terms of the kinds of hands you're using as bluffs, like your weaker offsuit stuff, your weaker suited stuff, and just they're basically all hands at one high, one low. So here against a small like 10-5, I mean queen or whatever have the straight draw, but ace X offsuit, they're a lot of one high, one low hands. Not really going to be 4-betting any of these suited, connected and suited gapped hands, contrary to what people might have decided to 4-bet in the past. Top one. 8-6 suited. Yeah. You use a blocker, because like these hands, like once you get into the 4-bet pot, it's who has top pair. It's not who has a straight. It's top pair is the nuts, and that's the that's basically it. All right, so I think we've talked a lot about pre-flop, talked a little bit about how you can adjust post-flop to the different sizes that you might choose. A lot of the study from big blind versus field, in terms of what to do in the end game, turn and river, will apply heads up fairly easily, right? Once you've made that flop bet, or flop check going into the turn and river, like the principles are going to be basically the same. It's really only the main differences are pre-flop and then the flop. Once you've decided to allocate your hands into a particular line on the flop, going to the next street is not going to be too much of a stretch. Those boards where like you're going to be c-betting everything's not really necessary here. What I put this into early access. So what you can do if you want to is try some of those boards where like you're c-betting everything and so c-betting a very high frequency, and then rerun them with slightly different ranges, where instead of opening min, you're opening like 2.5, right? And then you get this big folding block here, right? And see what that does. See if you're still going to be c-betting at a high frequency. I don't think that will be the case anymore. And that's just the small difference between 2 and 2.5, 2 and 2.5 open, right? You're gonna have a drop off in the c-betting frequency, and then you can maybe, if you have the RAM, chuck some small raise sizes in as well. So this is not you having to run a whole database again because you've already done that. It's looking at specific flops in the database that you've run and then comparing that flop with those ranges to a different tree with a different SPR and slightly different ranges, right? And then seeing what differences you have on the flop in terms of your flop strategy based on that change in the ranges and the change in the stack to pot ratio. And so that means that you'll be able to play a bit more fluidly when changing from one size to another pre-flop. And if your opponents do choose a particular size which they like, then you're going to have to study that size for out of position. Not sure. I mean, you're going to have to do some research to figure out what size is your opponents like, and then you're going to have to do a little bit of study, run a few sims about how to defend that.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Any questions in particular? Anything that we've gone through that you want to cover again quickly, or anything that you've seen in the study that you've done that you would like to talk about?
I mean, there are definitely interesting things found in the Sims, but okay. Here's what we can just talk about this briefly. 3-bet pots. I have some Sims. Let me pull it up.
Yep.
So, Ace King 5. I'll let you look at the ranges.
Yeah, okay. So ace king 5.
Yep. Well, let's go to a more. That board is kind of self-explanatory. Okay, queen jack 4. So, what makes 3-bet pots different and heads up is like imposition has all these offsuit broadways at some frequency.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd imagine that affects our frequency out of position, like on these double Broadway boards. They're not as advantageous for us as we just don't have as much of an advantage like we would like free-betting in a ring game. Does that sound more or less on track?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're not going to have a usually after you made a 3-bet at a position, like you're not going to have the range advantage going onto the flop.
Right.
You're going to have the nut advantage in the sense that you've got all the strong top pairs and the sets. You might not necessarily have the 2 pairs, but that's kind of what you're seeing, like on this, on like the queen jack, queen 10, king queen kind of board. You've got the big bet going there, right? That big bet, kings, aces, ace queen, is the main value component of that.
Mm-hmm. All right. I mean, it's a pretty polar 3-bet strategy, anyhow.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a lot of hands in it that my sim wouldn't have. At least not at a very, very high frequency. It's got a lot of very tiny frequency offsuit jump. Yeah. I guess that's okay. I mean, it's not too dissimilar to the sim that I've run for you. This isn't too different from big blind versus button. It's just the ranges are a bit different. The same kind of idea applies, where like if you're going to have a lot of boards where you've got nut advantage in the sense that you've got strong top pairs and they don't, but not necessarily range advantage. Here, like this ace jack 9, you got 53.63% equity, so there's a combination of range advantage and nut advantage. Your pre-flop range was fairly polar. Okay. And because it's pretty polar, you're usually going to be checking. If you do decide on a 3-bet size, if you like this 3-bet size, which is 9x over 2, so 9 big blinds over 2, which is okay, I think. Probably a little bit on the smaller side. You're going to be c-betting the flop a lot more, rather than relying on the 50% rule and having your opponent c-bet into you. The 50% rule is usually going to apply on the flop. The main difference is that in position will probably actually bet a little bit more than 50% if they're allowed to for a small size, because of your pre-flop range polarity. That polarity kind of incentivizes the in-position player to bet small to just deny equity from the bottom of your range and lose less when getting check raised. So that's kind of what you're seeing here. So the 2 sizes, you got pot and quarter pot. Pot just going for some nice fat value with the strong hands from pre-flop, using that pre-flop polarity, and in the small sizes, kind of like a feeler bet, get to the turn, and then your range should change enough on the turn. So say, for example, you make the small bet, there might not be too many raise sizes that you put in. So let's have a look at that line. So click on the So got the one raise size. I mean, maybe it's taking this line a lot of the time because it's got it only has to face one raise size. Maybe if there was two raise sizes, it wouldn't like to bet quarter pot quite as much and would like to check instead. But that's probably not too much of an issue.
Yeah, I mean, most of the boards, it's just sticking with the mainly polar strategy.
Yeah, and the reason why it's doing that is because the preflop range was polar, right of position.
Yeah.
So they're on the paired board. I guess it's taking that line a good chunk of the time just because it's pressing an overall range advantage, and avoiding the checking line because it doesn't really like to have to take that line.
Yeah, well, the 3-bet range interacts pretty well with this board specifically. All this stuff.
Yeah, it's got the sort of gaps and stuff too.
Splitting a little bit.
Yeah, because I ran pool. If you press check, yeah, right. So you haven't given it multiple sizes, but still, if you give it a couple more sizes, it might choose to use some of them. But I think, to be honest, in position after you check to them is going to be stabbing a lot for a third of the pot or something similar to that.
Yeah, I gave it 30%. So.
And 30% is fine. I think I'm just wondering what your check raise sizes were. You got a couple of check raise sizes in there. That's pretty good. A little bit small, I think, because this check raise ends up being smaller than the pot size bet.
Yeah, this was like a 20% raise size, I think.
20 and 40. Yeah, so it's
25%. Oh no, there's the check.
Yeah, for check raise.
20 and 40.
Yeah, 20 and 40. Yeah, so that's so it's going to lead to issues like if you have the option of just potting it yourself versus the only check raise that you can make is a check raise that's smaller than pot. It's going to try and avoid doing that. Anyway, that's sim construction for you. It's very very difficult to get things right all the time, especially if you're running these scripts where you're just looking at multiple flops, because a lot of time you're going to want to be doing some tinkering, having some exercises, and it can take a long time. So yeah, I mean, King A3, that's pretty interesting. C betting fairly high frequency, and it's probably just because of the difference in the weaker King X. Like in this particular pre-flop range you've got here, there's a lot of offsuit King X and the suited King X. So it's kind of wanting to have a block bet, and then if the turn is brick-ish, it's going to go for a big bet. Yeah, you're polarizing on the turn. But if the turn is like a club or something, it will probably play a bit more conservatively.
Yep. A lot of checking.
Yeah.
Okay, so you kind of split on the stream. So yeah, checking really high frequency.
Yeah, what's the lowest checking frequency there? 50%.
Yeah.
So like out of position once they've made this small bet on the flop, they're not going to be continuing a lot because that small bet was usually just to try and make a little bit of equity denial, and then suddenly like in position has the ability to make those bets now to try and deny your equity. So it's like I denied your equity on the flop, and now you can deny my equity on the turn. Kind of deal there. Anything else that you want to talk about?
Not really. I think we covered everything.
All right, great. Yeah. So download the sim from early access and just have a flick through it, and just remember that's not quite complete yet. I mean, it'll be much more polished by the time of the match. But try one thing in terms of preparation is figuring out what open sizes they like to use, what 3-bet sizes that they like to use, and then trying to do some practice within those sizes post flop to make sure that you're defending well, because half of the game is going to be defense.
Yeah, true. Yeah, it looks like Bulk likes to use a 2.3 open or whatever that's worth.
Yeah, 2.3. Yeah, I've got that here. Yeah, if you know anything about the 3-bet sizes, 2.3. How much you're folding? Folding 37.2, calling 38%, and 3-betting the remainder. So 3-bet frequency. I mean, I think 3-bet frequency throughout is going to be. So 100 minus 37 minus 38, 25%. 3-bet frequency, even if it's the min open, it's going to be 100 minus 29, minus 45-ish, 26%. So like 3-bet frequencies for most of the time should be around a quarter of the time. So like if they only like using that one open size, you can learn the 3-betting range. You don't really have to. You can just learn that 3-betting range off by heart, and then the min 5-bet range. If you do face a 4-bet, learn what that might be. Right, if you face a small enough 4-bet, learn what the min 5-bet range is, and the 5-bet all-in range against the possible 4-bets that you might be facing.
Yeah.
And of course, doing it the other way as well. Since if he's going to be using 2.3, like it's not going to make too much sense to for you to use 2.3 yourself, right? Because then that would just be playing on
giving him the most edge.
Yeah, right. So like try to avoid that. So if you're going to use people using multiple sizes, pick one above and pick one below. So maybe you can do something like 2.1 and then 2.6 or 2.7, or something like that. Having one above and one below, and then them having to continually be adjusting their thought process about the hand based on your preflop
Yeah,
size as well.
that's likely what I'll do.
Yeah.